Hello everyone, Mark Major here. This is the Action Figure Atorium. As you know, I'm a real big toy collector and I like to cover news within the toy industry whenever I can if I think it's interesting, and I think this is something that could be interesting. Some of you out there have seen with your own eyes through the power of YouTube videos Delta 17 3.75 O-ring action figures that are going to be coming out soon. The guy just posted some test shots of the figures and the packaging, and he's been on a couple different shows and a couple other YouTubers have covered it. So you might be thinking that this is the return of O-ring action figures. And you might be right, except for the fact that O-ring action figures have already returned and have returned for a few years now. But we're going to cover all this today in my sort of guide to O-ring action figures 2024. So everybody strap on the leather and hold on tight. So before we begin, we should probably, just for the uneducated, say exactly what an O-ring action figure is. Okay, so in the very early 80s, Hasbro came out with this line of toys called G.I. Joe. I know because my dad bought them for me. I had all the original series, the first wave that came out. They were all under the Christmas tree. They consist of 3.75 action figures that come in essentially 3 segments. There is a sort of main head torso piece. Then there is a set of legs that is attached together by a metal piece that has a little hook on it. And then, of course, there is a center waist piece that goes between the two. And what you do is you take a little black rubber band, it goes around the hook, and then you feed that through the waist piece, right? And you then, there's a little hole in here, and then hook it to this piece, right? And it can be tricky to get the first one, but once you've done it, it's pretty easy. And anyone who's broken one of these knows that they're O-rings because you discovered the broken rubber band inside. I know that I had some figures that broke when I was a kid. In fact, there are specifically these Buck Rogers action figures. Yes, there was a Buck Rogers TV show in the 70s. It was very disco-y, and they had action figures, and I had those action figures. And their stormtrooper character, their sort of evil henchman guy, he broke. So that's my story personally with O-ring action figures. Don't really miss them, but I know people have a lot of nostalgia for them and a lot of nostalgia for the old G.I. Joe action figures. And so you're going to find a lot of these nostalgia knots coming out of the woodwork talking about O-ring action figures, asking for O-ring action figures. In some cases, we're getting companies that are now making O-ring action figures. Okay. So let's take a look then at just exactly how many different companies out there are making these O-ring action figures. Let's switch over to desktop view. First of all, Small Joe's is a company that I like to frequent, and thus I always like to try and give a shout out and a promote whenever possible. They sell these O-rings, people. If you have G.I. Joe's and they are broken, spend $2.50 and get 25 of these things and fix all of your broken action figures. And if you find broken G.I. Joes where they have all the parts but the O-ring is broken at like a thrift store or garage sale and they don't want much money for it because it is broken, well, just know that you can probably fix them. All right, so this toy line that you're kind of seeing right now out there in the sort of, current events is this company Delta 17. This is their website. This is a picture of their toys, the actual individual shots, the individual figures. I don't think these pics are particularly great, but they could also be a lot worse. And if you want to see a little bit more of like what the finished product's going to look like, here's their Instagram. So they're doing the classic G.I. Joe looking card with the bubble on it. And you've got these sort of badass military looking people. I really like the sort of Soviet sniper girl. I think if these things ever become a reality, I might actually plunk down some money on that, assuming they're not a crazy amount of money. What you need to know, though, is that these are not the only cats making O-ring action figures. They are, however, people who are not crowdfunding their O-ring action figures. They're coming out of pocket with it. Always best if you can come out of pocket. It sucks to have to give Kickstarter or Indiegogo a chunk of your loot, but sometimes that's the only way you can do it. Okay, let's go to Kickstarter and let's look at some O-ring action figure campaigns that did fund and look like they will ship. First of all, Operation Recall. This was put together by some guys who I believe worked on the original G.I. Joe toy line, and as you can see, it looks very much like G.I. Joe, almost kind of identical. And there's a guy, I don't know what it is with like taking an action figure and having him come with a pet, some type of a familiar. You give him a crocodile, you give him an eagle, maybe he's got like some kind of a snake or something. I don't know. I think people really like that. I think in terms of marketing, if you're going to make an action figure and you're not so sure what to do, give him a pet, even if it's like a weasel or like a possum or something that just sat on his shoulders, you know. Give him a pet and I think you're going to have a lot more sales. You can see that they have a whole bunch of character designs. They don't really, in this campaign, show us, other than this guy, they don't show us any 3D prints. They do show us some SketchUps and whatnot, and there's a group of guys. And I gotta say, when you get to this age, and you're working as a team and you've worked in the industry, you're probably not gonna cut and run with the money. That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking these guys are legit, and they're taking their time, but they're moving slow on fulfilling this. They're still sketching on napkins what all the figures are going to look like, but they do update it all the time, and they are moving along. Okay, let's move on to this one, call signed Longbow action figures. Pretty much the same thing, if you ask me. It's all very much looks like military G.I. Joe guys of the 3.75 scale. Of course, anyone with a beret goes up a level. In my book, these guys all look very G.I. Joe-ish to me. These, of course, are just, you know, flat JPEGs, not even 3D prints. But these guys are pretty close. It looks like they're going to have their figures middle of 2024. Did fund, was a successful campaign. Shows you that, and look, they did $206,000. Shows you that there's plenty of juice in the tank as far as people making O-rings and people buying O-rings to keep this thing going. Let's move on to this one. Join the Navy. What are you guys thinking about joining the Navy? In the Navy action figures. It's called In the Navy. And there's the whole roster of guys. And you're either a sailor or you're some sort of a guy who is a pilot on a Navy ship, Navy pilot. Or you're some sort of Navy Marine, or maybe you're some sort of Navy Admiral. Whatever it is, you're in the Navy, okay? And I didn't watch their video, but I assume that they probably have somebody, not the original band, the Village People, but somebody doing a cover of that song In the Navy. I'm guessing. That's what I would do. I would maybe like a Muzak version or an 8-bit chiptune version playing real lightly in the background so that there's no loss or copyright claim. So these guys are, these Navy guys are looking like they funded and they're eventually going to ship. They give updates on this stuff and it looks like it's happening. And they're about $22 each. It'd be great if you can get it down to around $20, but I understand the extra $2 goes a long way. Okay, even more. There's even more O-ring campaigns. Strike Force Alpha action figures. Okay, it's these 4 guys, and one guy's got soft goods. I like the guy with the patch and the beret. I don't really know about this sort of like I don't know, sort of retro Desert Storm man here, but it's these 4 guys. He raised $116,000, Strike Force Alpha, and of course there's a lot of, you know, they get to do the 3D prints. Is this the guy? Are these the guys? You know, when you get these old fat white dudes who look like they've retired, they're not going to cut and run with the money. They want to actually have this stuff go out. And so these are the kinds of things. I mean, I say this because I did a video where I looked at dudes who did Kickstarters and they fled with the cash. They took the loot and they left. And you never know who's going to quit or give up on your campaign. But there's all the card backs, what the artwork looks like. Strike Force Alpha. I think these guys, they updated in December. I think that the order's on the way from China in October, so I think these guys are shipping or have shipped very soon. Okay, that's 4 more O-rings out there. Now, these guys. Legends of the Hidden Forest. This actually I thought looked pretty good. And unfortunately, he only made $41,000, and he was going for $35,000. And look at all these figures that he's coming up with. Now, the whole thing behind this is these are not U.S. European military-looking dudes. These, of course, are some kind of ninja force, shogun force, sort of Oriental adventures, sort of Asiatic warriors kind of thing. I think that's a cool thing to do. I think that that's different. And I think it's kind of cool. I kind of like that. I wish the guy would have hit bigger numbers, though. I think that would be good to show that there are people who are looking for things that just aren't super cliche G.I. Joes, that sort of thing. So this guy, I believe he has shipped his figures. I think he just got them real recently, a couple weeks ago, and these have gone out. So people actually have new O-ring action figures in their hands. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, well, you know, that's fine, because there's a lot of people out there who are like, you know, super into their little niche thing, and they're like, they get out and they design their O-ring action figures, and they have a Kickstarter for it, and they raise some money. And it's like kind of a one-hit wonder, one-off sort of thing, and O-rings don't really exist. Well, we're going to go over to Toy Habits, a site I recommend you check out from time to time. It does get a recommend from the Action Figure Atorium. And these are all their articles on O-ring that they have posted. And we can see that going back as far as 2022, Hasbro, the people who own G.I. Joe, right, did a pre-order for retro collection O-ring action figures, a Duke and a Cobra Commander 2-pack. It's these two figures. You can't get one or the other, got to get both. It was a pre-order. And they come on the classic card backs and they're O-ring action figures. And if you look at some other reporting that they have done here at Toy Habit, you can see that they're showing us that the Sky Striker HasLab came with O-ring figures, that they're also, Hasbro is now doing a crossover O-ring G.I. Joe action figures and Transformers. I think that's kind of interesting as far as a marketing gimmick. Supposedly there might be a Hasbro Transformers G.I. Joe movie crossover in the works. They're rebooting the Transformers again. Transformers 1 is coming out. There could be a G.I. Joe element to it, so this could be relative. They might see how this does, and that could influence this film. Anyways, O-rings are not dead, people. Hasbro is like, you know, they're not going totally ape with it, but they are definitely doing it. And they're not alone. SuperSeven is now getting in on the O-ring action. This is from November 30th of this year, so little over a month ago, the news was reported that SuperSeven is now going to be doing G.I. Joe O-rings. They're already doing G.I. Joe figures 3.75. Now they're just doing some O-ring ones. Why are they doing this? What do they know something we don't know? Do they know that there's a big market for O-ring action figures at this point? Is it building up? Or was this a decision that was made some time ago, and because it takes about 2 years once you launch that boat, right? Once you launch that boat to get anywhere with your action figures, whenever they come out, whatever the lay of the land is at the time is the lay of the land at the time. If there's a huge demand for O-ring when they just happen to come out, SuperSeven's going to do well. If people are burnt out on them, they got their nostalgia fix, they bought some off eBay, they found some at a thrift store, they participated in a Kickstarter, they may not give a shit about SuperSeven. Some people don't even like SuperSeven. I know a lot of people do not like their reaction figures. I know a lot of people do not like their Ultimates figures. Well, they don't dislike the Ultimates line from SuperSeven. I think they don't like the price for them. And I guess I would be in that category, because I always thought the price on this stuff was just way out of control. I guess the main point that I'm trying to drive home here with this video is that you might think that because you saw one company, an indie company, coming out with an O-ring thing, that there's that there's now this new revolution about to begin. It's already started. It's already deep into its a first wave of revisiting O-ring action figures, and it's almost going to get to the point pretty soon, because I'm telling you, prediction from the Action Figuratorium. I'm pretty sure people are going to get burnt out on O-ring G.I. Joe action figures in that they're going to get tired of guys in helmets. They're going to get bored of guys in berets and wearing camo, and all their accessories they come with are guns, and the occasional ninja man isn't enough. And people are going to look for maybe some O-ring characters, but maybe a totally different genre. And that would be a big step, because it's proven that G.I. Joe works and that there's a lot of love for G.I. Joe, both the 6-inch line, the classifieds, and people out there still are collecting and loving the original 80s and 90s G.I. Joe. And all these retro O-rings coming out, it just, further says that G.I. Joe is a winning brand. But could you win with something else? Like, could you do fantasy figures? Could you have O-ring figures who are like knights and warriors and wizards and mages and rogues and that kind of thing? Or could you do sort of like secret agents or John Wick, like guys in business suits, women in power suits, and they all have Uzis and AR-15s or whatever? Could you do something like that? Will we see something like that? And I'm going to guess, and I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say after all these Kickstarters have blown through and SuperSeven has come out with all their G.I. Joes, people are going to want O-ring figures, right? But they're going to want something else. Now, the other thing is O-ring only 3.75? Or could there be bigger O-ring figures? And you have to ask yourself why. My belief is the only reason why O-ring figures right now are being made or exist is because of the impact that G.I. Joe O-ring figures had on the landscape of the toy history, right? Our history of toys is pretty much dominated by a lot of these G.I. Joe figures and the O-ring technology. And so people are kind of like people who want to it wasn't enough to just have their band put out a vinyl record in the type of nostalgia, right? They now want to put it out on cassette. Or, I saw the guy who was the drummer for the band Ministry, who runs Invisible Records. Actually, he has this band called Pigface. He put out a Pigface release. He released it on 100 8-track copies is what he was selling his new release on at one point. So there's always this bit of nostalgia to kind of redo something, like, hey, we're the band Tool, but our next album's coming out on wax cylinder or something. There's always, it's a marketing gimmick and people love that. But could you take the marketing gimmick, right? Could you take this gimmick and could you apply it to different scales, 1/6 scales, 1/12 scales, things like that? That to me might be interesting and might be worthy of a one-time crowdfund. Take the money, make some figures, get them to people, and then get out. Because I don't know if that's the kind of thing that could withstand several waves and outings. But I don't know. I'll leave it up to you guys. Leave a comment on where you think all this O-ring madness is going. And as always, people, I want you to stay charged.